So my name is Jan. I'm a flower grower and florist and an artist, and during the summer I have a flower field full of flowers, and in the winter I'm more about connecting with the landscape around me. My business is based actually on the Somerset Devon border. All my inspiration really is from the environment, sustainability, and really reflecting the beautiful countryside that we live in my work. I really love this time of year. Once I've got over the fact that the flowers have died, that the frost has killed the last of the dahlias, I'm really happy to start thinking about all the winter projects. A lot of the wreaths that I make are from foraged materials. For me, foraging is actually as much about observation of nature and all its forms and colours and textures as it is about the gathering. So when I'm foraging, I'm on a walk basically, and I'm just immersing myself in all the beautiful shapes and silhouettes that you get, all the lovely bare trees, and you can see all these wonderful structures and the way that maybe a tree is bending in the away from the wind, or the way that a birch tree might have some beautiful hanging hair-like strands with these gorgeous catkins on the end. So I'm constantly observing and enjoying shapes and silhouettes. So today what I wanted to do was take you on a walk really, and show you some of the things that I like to pay attention to, and hopefully inspire you to go out and do the same sort of thing. Talked a little bit about looking at the kind of structures that are out there and the silhouettes, and one of the things I love doing is looking up into trees, and you get the shapes between the branches as much as the shapes of the branches themselves, and the light that filters through. To me, that's really exciting. So looking up, but also looking down. There's amazing things down here. So, for example, just literally under my feet, there's this gorgeous moss. She's really green and tactile, and a beautiful texture as well as colour. And actually, if you look really closely, it's a bit like a tree. It has ferny nature as well. So it's almost like the macro and the micro. While we're talking about the forest floor, I think it's worth mentioning something about some of the different kinds of lichens, because I love incorporating it into a wreath. It's usually on quite a brittle branch. So one of the things that I'm always looking for is shapes that will lend themselves to the shape of the wreath, the circle of the wreath. And that's just beautiful because it's got that lovely arch to it. And as a florist, this is what you're doing all the time really, when you've got your arrangements in mind. It's like looking for the dahlia that's going kind of out to the side when you want something to come forward in a vase at you. It's the same idea really, which is why I love growing flowers really, because the ones that you would buy from the wholesale markets, usually the imported ones, that's a whole nother story, but they are very uniform and straight up and down, and actually what we want is this is just perfect. think it's worth mentioning something about being a responsible forager, because in this moss is a whole ecosystem. Creatures live in here. We need to respect it as a habitat as much as anything. And even under fallen leaves and bits of old rotting wood, that's what's feeding this beautiful tree. This isn't about taking as much as we possibly can from nature. It's about enjoying it and understanding it, and also being responsible, I suppose, and thinking about sustainability. So for example, berries. Berries are amazing. Look at the colours, the red against the green. That's such a Christmassy sight, isn't it? It's something that we associate with the festive season, that beautiful pop of red. But of course, this is food for the birds. So we need to really remember that. So please don't go and take all the holly berries from the holly trees. However, I did notice that there's a little bit of holly on the floor here. So I think we could probably have that and put that in our basket and use it as part of our wreath that we're going to make later. We're looking at this beautiful mossy bank here, and it's quite amazing because there are probably at least 5 different kinds of moss in this area, and it's really stunning and beautiful, and the textures and the different colours of each moss are really beautiful. That is gorgeous. That is called tamarisk moss. I love the way that the moss has continued up these branches as well. That is just stunning. You get that in these Somerset Devon woods where it's really damp, and the moss actually covers the whole trees, and they're like green velvet. Really beautiful. And it's the kind of thing that I really love to reflect in a wreath or a piece of work. I mean, I just found this stick, it's just a stick on the floor, and it's got a lovely mossy and licheny end to it. Again, it's the sort of thing that to incorporate into a wreath is really beautiful. The other thing that I've noticed here is a lovely wild honeysuckle, which is actually great for making. This piece is loose, but it's a great material to make a base with. So you can make the actual ring with the honeysuckle vine, and it's already kind of twisted for you as well. That's one of the things that I love. I've got one that I made in my studio actually a couple of years ago, and it's still going strong. It's got lots of dried things on it, like honesty and dried flowers and berries that just seem to have lasted. I wanted to mention is the lovely dead bracken, because I love the shapes, the ferny silhouettes that you get, and if you pick it a little bit earlier when it's still got that kind of yellow colour, and put it with the brown stuff, it's a really lovely thing. And also incorporate it into a wreath. So we've looked down at the moss, but I wanted to look up as well, because we're we're underneath this lovely hazel, and it's that time of year when it gets these beautiful green early catkins, and they're just lovely textural things and perfect for incorporating into a wreath. So this is a gorgeous silver birch, and I love it because you get those gorgeous dark branches that silhouette against the sky, and then on the end of them are the beautiful birch catkins, which are sometimes quite golden at this time of year. Right next to this birch is a hazel, which is being invaded by this ivy. So there's this lovely trailing stuff, and then at the top you've got all the fruiting ivy. So eventually it will topple if it's not taken down by its owner. So one thing to think about is, if you know people who have land and are managing that land, you know, they're often maybe chopping trees down in order to manage the woodland. So, you know, that's a good source of material, really. And I use a lot of this from my trees. I just drape it over the beams in my house. I'm lucky to have beams, I know. It's only a little house. I drape it over, and it's a lovely Christmas deck with a bit of fairy light going through it. But you can also use it in a wreath. Fruiting ivy, and nubby ivy, in fact. So what we mean by nubby is that you get these kind of branching bits that are coming out from the main branch, and they have beautiful leaf formations on them, and you can use that as a foliage as well as a texture, because you've got the lovely seed heads. Now these seed heads are, or the fruit I should say, they will go the most wonderful bulbous green. I call it the bobbly bits in my classes. That's a technical term. And then of course they go black, and those are also amazing. So those are things to look out for. Thing to remember, it is nectar for bees and other beneficial insects. So again, just be responsible, don't take the whole lot, leave some for the wildlife. We're standing under this absolutely magnificent fir. It's huge, actually. Fir is obviously very festive, and it provides, I mean, there's so many different kinds of fir, aren't there? They give wonderful texture and colour, and you know, it's really worth paying attention to the differences, because they will bring variety to the piece that you're working on in a very lovely way. I mean, some people will make whole wreaths just of fir. Personally, I like to break it up with something else and bring in other elements, but you can do all sorts of things with a fallen fir branch. Beautiful area of the woods down by the river, where it's all very damp and boggy actually. And in here is the most wonderful sphagnum moss, and this is perfect for making a wreath, even if you just use a small amount so you get the lovely green. The thing about moss is it is the most amazing ecosystem, and in here are microscopic organisms like nematodes and other beneficial organisms bear that in mind as you're using this amazing material, and to think about foraging responsibly. So I'm going to use a bit of this in the wreath that we're going to make today, because it's absolutely beautiful. It's really soft and textured. There's lots of different greens in there, and it's going to hold the moisture really well. So I'm going to enjoy using that. So I've just stumbled upon what I call absolute treasure, which is a whole larch tree that's been felled. And look, I've found all these gorgeous sprays of cones with lovely moss and lichen all over them. And honestly, these are just so amazing in a wreath. I have made whole wreaths just of these cones because I love them so much, and they lend themselves so beautifully to a wreath with lots of lovely bits winging out. Even just the bobbly, branchy bits I think are beautiful. So we're definitely going to incorporate these in the wreath today. We're in the kitchen garden, and we're looking at herbs, and here we've got a lovely branch of rosemary, which smells amazing when you crush it. Now, if you're making a fresh foliage wreath, this is great. It doesn't actually last that long, but it will dry out and it will still give the scent that you get when you crush rosemary. Bay, lovely evergreen bay, brilliant for not just culinaries, but in a vase with some flowers any time of year, in a vase with other foliage, and in a wreath. So I use this a lot. It is a brilliant, long-lasting foliage. Beautiful, beautiful crab apples. Now, the thing about crab apples is they look amazing on a wreath, and the colour and the shape, well, they're just delightful, aren't they? However, you'll notice that this tree has very few left. So by Christmas, pretty much the crab apples are gone, and I don't use anything imported, so I haven't yet found a way of preserving them. So we have gathered and foraged, and now we're going to make our wild wreath with all our beautiful ingredients. Before we start our make, I thought I'd just show you the kind of thing that you're going to end up with. Obviously yours will be totally unique because everybody's is different depending on the materials you use. This one is a Exmoor inspired wreath, so it's got this beautiful winging off branches, the way that trees bend in the wind out there, and then some lovely twisted hazels, birch and larch cones, as well as all the rose hips and bracken. So I just wanted to give you an idea really of how you can bring all those elements together that we were so enjoying on the walk. So I'm just going to show you some of the tools that we need and some of our beautiful ingredients.
You will need something like a wreath ring, which is this metal ring. You can buy them online or in a hobby shop. This is real wire, so this is something that we're going to be binding our wreath with. You need a good pair of secateurs. Mine are a bit dirty, but they do the job. And maybe, possibly, some of these pins. So these are just metal mossing pins, and again, you can buy them online. In terms of ingredients, the world is our absolute oyster, really. So I just wanted to show you this wreath ring here. If you wanted to be completely compostable, as it were, you could make your own wreath ring. You don't need to use the metal one. You could go out in the garden and cut some willow, and I've used some dogwood here, and you can make a very pretty circle of wound willow and dogwood, and you can put moss on that, or you can leave it exposed, and because actually it's quite a nice thing in itself. We're going to use the metal one today just for ease. We've got our lovely moss, sphagnum moss, that we talked about earlier. Things like beautiful little apples. These are just windfalls that I've found on the ground. Some yellow crab apples. Some lovely bobbly fruiting ivy. And some nubby green leafy ivy as well. I've also brought some old man's beard, which is beautiful texture on a wreath. In fact, I've seen whole wreaths just made with that. Absolutely stunning. What else have we got? We've got red crab apples as well. Quince. They are amazing because they last ages, is what I've discovered. And then things like the beautiful wiggly coloured twisted willow or contorted willow. And of course the larch, with its lovely lichen winging branchy bits. So those are our ingredients that we're going to be working with today, plus the odd interesting seed head. That's a tree peony. So we're going to start by attaching the real wire to the wreath ring, and we do that by just putting the end through one of the bars and bending it over and through, pulling it tight, and then just twisting it so that the end is tight. I'm just going to cut that end off. Don't use your own secateurs if you want them to stay sharp. So then we've got our real wire attached to the base of the ring, the wreath ring. So the mossing stage it's quite straightforward, really. The key thing is to pack it in so it's lovely and firm. Now in your moss you're going to find all sorts of roots and bits and pieces. Don't worry about that. That will help hold it all together. So just take your bunches of moss, handfuls of moss, place them on the ring, make sure it's pushed together, take your wire and take it into the centre, lift the ring, pull it under, and you're going to pull it quite tight, because what you don't want is slack wire, because then the whole thing won't hold together. So pushing up the moss, do it again, and you just repeat basically. So take your wire ring over into the centre, lift the ring, pull it under and pull it taut. And your next handful, it's really key to make sure it's really firmly up against the last one, because what you don't want are weak points where you've got your join. So carry on with your reel wire, taking it round. Some people end up using loads and loads of reel wire. It's not actually necessary. You don't need to go mad with it. It won't fall apart, because actually you're going to continue going round with the reel wire once we start attaching all the loveliness, all the materials to the ring itself. I'm going to use a little bit of this nice green stuff on the top, because quite nice to have some colour in there. A lot of this moss is quite beige. A few leaves in there, really doesn't matter. Of course, you're going to have all sorts of wildlife in there as well, probably insects and such like, which is quite a nice thing, really. Think of it as a living sculpture. You can push it up together. Some people like it to be really neat and pristine, but because we're doing a wild wreath, and because I'm very messy, I don't mind all those shaggy bits around the edge. I quite like them, actually. And the good news about moss, sphagnum moss in particular, is that it has antiseptic qualities. So, in fact, they used it during the war to dress soldiers' wounds. So, as you're doing it, your hands are getting cleansed. More of that. Bit more of that. Take out that twig. Oh, there's a bit of grass in there. That won't matter. Help hold the thing together. And the thing about your mossing is that if you do end up with a particularly thin bit, maybe there, for example, a little bit thin, I can always add to it as once I get round to that space. So don't be precious about it. You can just go with it. Some people like to wear gloves, but I like the feel of it. And the antiseptic qualities, particularly in these times. So, nearly there. You can, of course, if I was using my willow ring, I'd probably use string to do this. It works just as well. You have to make sure you pull it tight, but then it really, really is compostable, fully compostable. So there we have our lovely, mossy, messy ring, which is our, if you like, it's kind of our canvas that we're going to use now to decorate and embellish and put beautiful things around it. Leave your reel wire attached because we're going to use that in the next part of the process. So I'm going to start off with adding some foliage to the wreath ring. So here are some of the bits that we collected earlier today on our forage. So I've got a lovely piece of fir with some nice textured bits on the end. I've got some nubby ivy, and I've also got some of those lovely green fruiting ivy bits, the bobbly bits as we call them. Now, so I'm just making a sort of a little, almost like a little bouquet, a little bunch that's going to sit on the wreath ring. I just need to move it round. I think I'm going to place it so that it's coming round this corner. So what we're interested in is what I call the flow, really, of the wreath. So I want to start things going around this way, as it were. So I'm just going to take my wreath wire and I'm going to put it over the stems of my little bunch of foliage here, just in the way that we were wiring the moss. I'm wiring the rest of the ingredients, really. So I can always trim that down later. I'm just going to trim the ends. The stalks aren't very attractive, so I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe what we would do is put a little bunch of these lovely crab apples together just to give some colour and texture there. I'm gonna take my wire and catch the stems of that as well. So that's our starting point. A little woodlandy bit going on there. Then I'm going to think about, I mean, I could carry on, of course, and put loads of this foliage on, but actually what I want is something a bit more that involves, well, I want to expose some of this moss because I think it's lovely, but also I'm interested in using some of the lovely flowing sticks. So this is the twisted willow, and it just creates these beautiful lines. I love the colours, the oranges and the yellows, and actually I think I'm going to go the other way, which is the same direction as my foliage. So I'm just going to take it round the wreath like this, and for now I'm going to pin it using one of the moss pins, but when we get round with the wire I can always move it as well, because I might decide that I don't like it where I've put it. I might want to move it. So I think it's really important to kind of be flexible about your design, because it kind of evolves as you go, really. So we'll see if that works. Quite like that bit winging off there like that. The other thing that I'd quite like to do with this, I think, is really define this inner circle. So I've got some lovely flowing trailing birch, which I'm going to use in the centre of my wreath. So it's got lovely colours on it. It's got lichen, it's got the darkness. It really reflects the the trees, I think, as they lose their leaves, and so we can enjoy that. I'm just going to cut the twiggy bits off. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to put it in the middle of my wreath, I think. It can go on the outside as well, this stuff. I mean, it looks great either way. But it's almost like you're making a little nest in there. But can you see what it's doing? It now means we've really got that centre defined, and we've got some lovely flowing bits going on here. I quite like that, the way that these bits are just, with these lovely catkins on the end, are just popping out of the circle there. So so what I might do is just catch some of these traily bits using my reel wire, just to keep it in place. Now I need to think about what else is going on. So I'm going to use some of these lovely licheny larch branches, just because I think they give a beautiful colour. And the lichen, if this is hung outside, it will stay quite moist and live and gorgeous and keep growing, which is the good thing. So I'm just having a little think about where to place these. So still thinking about the way that things are moving around. I might just move that. The way that things move around this circle and create movement, and quite like that, I think. And then maybe, oops, we've got a bit of grass there. Maybe something like this. So what I'm doing is I'm just building up the picture, as it were. I want that to go underneath. And then I'm going to take my reel wire. I'm not going to tie these bits in too tightly, because I quite like the lines that the willow is creating, so I don't want to lose that too much. So I'm going to take it under so that I can catch the larch with the reel wire. And again, pull it tightly. You won't actually see this wire once the whole thing is done. These larch branches, they're quite brittle, so you do need to think about that as you go. You don't want to break them. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. I might just pin that down using one of the mossing pins. Okay, so I want a few more of these larch cones around my circle. under there. The other way of attaching things is finding the wires that you used for your mossing, and you can just stick the ends under the wires. This one I'm going to leave free because I like it hanging like that. So this piece here, I'm going to pop it under one of those wires if I can find one. So I'm just finding that wire and I'm putting my stem through the wire. Whoa, trying to anyway. There it is. I'm just going to tighten that wire. Right. And if your wires are a bit loose on the other side, you can always turn it over and just twist them in. So I want to disguise those wires there. I'm thinking about quince actually. I'm thinking about quince. So if I wanted to attach this, I'm going to use a different kind of wire. I'm going to use some stub wire. Again, you can get these in places like the Range or online. So I'm going to push it up through the centre and make a kind of hook on the end, like that. And then I'm going to just push that into the top of the quince and just like that. So it's like a lollipop. That's going to go through my moss and out the other side. Just get it to sit in the way that you want it, and you can just bend it over and push the end into the moss, just so it doesn't stick anybody or stab yourself. And then I might even think about some more crab apples there. Let's have a look. I'm going to use a bit of stub wire, make a hairpin, and I'm going to take it through the nest of crab apples so that it comes through the other side. And again, I'm just going to get the ends and push them into the moss. So we're building up our picture here. I'm not sure about that. I think I may need to take some of that off. One of the things that's important to do is, as you're working, is to stand back and have a look and see if your design is working. Is it flowing in the way you want it to flow? Do you need a little bit more greenery? Something around the edge, perhaps? We've added a number of elements. I'm using some of these crab apples to cover over some of the mechanics, the wires. I'm thinking it's looking quite good, but I want something to go round this edge just to kind of define it, really. So I'm going to use a little bit more of this gorgeous birch, and all I'm going to do is tip the wreath, and I'm going to find one of those wires at the top. I'm going to push the end through the wire to stick it in there. One of the existing wires, that is. I'm going to take this lovely flowing birch and I'm just going to take a mossing pin and catch it round the sides. I don't want to catch all of it. I want some of it to flow free like it does in nature. But what it's going to do is help me take my eye around the wreath and give a bit of an interesting what do we call this? I don't know, trailing bits. We might need a little bit more. So, you know, we called it a wild wreath. So this is really giving it a lovely wild feel. I hope. That's the idea. But again, I'm gonna catch that with a mossing pin. And take it just around. I might just catch it there. You can always change this. I think the important thing is to, in a minute, put it up on a wall or on a door, hang it and see, stand back and look and see what it needs. You may even decide that the top is somewhere else once you see it. You might need something else coming out here. In fact, I do. Yes, I want that. I'm just going to stick that in there. Take a pin, catch it. So what that's done is given me more movement up here. So it's continuing all this lovely flowing, wow, birch. I love it. I might take that round. Just catch it in there. Quite like that to sit out a bit. I don't like anything too neat, as you can see. So my suggestion now would be to take your wreath and really stand back and have a look